Thank you. Welcome to Country is a ceremony performed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders to welcome visitors to the traditional land. Welcome to Country has been a part of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander protocol for thousands of years and can be performed in a variety of ways, such as talking, dancing, singing or smoking ceremonies. My name is Pamela Widders. I'm a very proud descendant of the Himbarong clan of the Anaiwan Nation of the New England Tablelands. My family hail from Walcran, Inglebar and Walbrook. My family lived on the bank of the Mullarindi River, which is known as the MacDonald River. Just up the river is the Inglebar Aboriginal Reserve where my family congregated. Inglebar is an Anaiwan word meaning whirlpools of crayfish. The University of New England respects and acknowledges that its people, programs and facilities are built on land and surrounded by a sense of belonging to both ancient and contemporary of the world's oldest living culture. In doing so, uni values and respects Indigenous knowledge systems as a vital part of the knowledge capital of Australia. And we also share this land, the caring of this land, with the Gumbaynggirr, Dunghutti and Gamilaroi people. As a descendant of the Anaiwan people, I would like to welcome you to Anaiwan Country. We acknowledge that this land as Anaiwan, and by acknowledging country, we also acknowledge and recognise the strength, resilience and capacity of the Anaiwan people. I would also like to pay my respects to our elders past and present and to our future leaders. In closing, I would also like to pay my respects to those of you that are here today, and I hope you enjoy your stay here and that the weather is really good to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pam. And now I'd like to introduce the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and Education, Michael Wolman.
Thank you. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting today on the land of the Anaiwan people, who are the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting, and that the Anaiwan people share this land and share custodianship of this land with the Dunghutti, Gamilaroi and Gumbaynggirr people, and that we pay our respects to their elders, and we also pay our respects to all of you who've come here from very far afield, some of you, to join us at this conference. I'm very proud as Dean of this faculty to be able to welcome you and to acknowledge the incredible work that's been done by Bronwyn and all of her colleagues in classics, but also the work of many student volunteers and the work of many professional members of staff here in the faculty have also really pulled out all of the stops to make sure that this is a fantastic meeting of the Australasian Society for Classical Studies. I will refer to my notes because there's an awful lot of people that I do have to say thank you to also, and some of those people are going to be speaking. We have a keynote speaker, Professor Teresa Morgan from the University of Oxford, so I'd like to welcome Teresa. Julie Anderson, Dr. Julie Anderson from the British Museum, who will deliver the 23rd Maurice Kelly Lecture as part of this conference. And also tonight, Associate Professors Tom Hillard and Lee Beness from Macquarie University, who are going to be delivering the 21st A.D. Trendall Lecture as part of the Australian Academy of Humanities celebrations of their important milestone in their history. We've also had some very generous support from sponsors, so I'd like to acknowledge their generous support for this conference. We've got support, of course, from the Australasian Society for Classical Studies and the Australian Academy of Humanities. The New England Museum of Antiquities AG and IC Macready Fund have supported the conference, as has the museum's Maurice Kelly Lecture Fund and the UNE Friends of Antiquity Society. And we also benefited from a generous grant from the New South Wales Government through their Destinations New South Wales fund. So it was tremendous to get the news a few weeks ago that that funding had been granted. So it's wonderful to know that this conference has been so generously supported by so many people. Classics and ancient history. The study of classics and ancient history has been there since the beginning of this university, even before it was a university, when it was a college of the University of Sydney, way back in 1938. Right from day one, students here in Armidale were studying classics and ancient history. When we became an independent university in our own right in the 1950s, classics and ancient history continued as a key part of our curricula. At that time, the Vice-Chancellor of the university, Robert Madgwick, made an extremely brave decision that this university was, from day one of its time as a university, was going to teach people here in Australia, wherever they were, through distance education. And of course, we've carried on doing that as one of Australia's premier universities for online study for so many people. And what that has meant is that across Australia and even internationally, we have been contributing to the vibrancy of classics, making sure that wherever people are here in Australia, if they have a passion for the classics, if they have a passion for understanding ancient history, if they have a passion for learning Latin and ancient Greek, we're able to play our part in ensuring that passion finds an outlet through education. So we're incredibly proud of the role that we're playing here at UNE in ensuring that I'm sure in decades to come, a society like this will continue to meet and will attract an incredible audience like is happening this year, 2019. Of course, what we do is founded on the and that, I think, is testament to the skill and talent and, as I said, passion that they bring to their role. We're also delighted that the university, through its fundraising activities, is working as hard as it possibly can to continue to support the vibrancy of classics here, in particular the vibrancy of our teaching of ancient languages. So I'm delighted to announce today that thanks to the generosity of Mr. and Mrs. Lam of Hong Kong, in 2019 we're launching the inaugural AG and IC Macready Honours Scholarship for Classical Languages. We're also launching an appeal to raise funds for an endowed AG and IC Macready lectureship in ancient Greek language. The lectureship is named in the honour of former UNE lecturer, the late Alfred Macready, and his wife Irene, who were passionate advocates and teachers of classical languages and ancient history. With the support of the Lam family's incredibly generous donation of $300,000, we're well on the way to establishing this new role, which, along with our existing Charles Tesoriero lectureship in Latin, will ensure that UNE is providing the twin foundations of a classical education well into the future. This conference is also an opportunity for us to recognise that often we're living in a world which seems to be dominated by discourses where science is the motivating and over-determining factor. We know that in the humanities, as broadly configured, and especially through disciplines like classics, we will continue to play a role in doing what all good science does, which is to make sure that we're not overrun by opinion. We're not overrun by voices that are asking us to take easy options, but we're always working really, really hard to make sure that what we do is based on fantastic scholarship, a really firm evidence basis, even when the evidence that we uncover through our scholarship challenges maybe some long-held ideas about who we are as human beings and where we've come from in our pasts. So I'm extremely pleased that we're able to host this conference, which I know will give us ample opportunity to witness the incredible range and depth of scholarship that is happening in the classics here in Australia and further afield internationally as well. So welcome and please do enjoy yourself in Armidale and I wish you all the best for a fantastic conference. Thank you.
Well, welcome. The conveners want to also add a very quick greeting. So, Graham and Clemens, if you'd like to join me. My name is Bronwyn Hopwood. I'm delighted to welcome you here to Armidale.
I'm Graham Burke, and I'm even happier to welcome you here to Armidale. What comes next, though?
My name is Clemens Krohn, and we were already told that we compiled the best Ask conference booklet ever. So I can assure you that this will be the best Ask conference ever. So let the games begin.
As your divine trifecta for the conference, if you have any questions, please come and ask us, or ask our many very talented and lovely volunteers. They're wearing lovely lime green shirts, so if you need assistance, they'll be very happy to help. One point of housekeeping for the end of this session. At the end of the lecture tonight, we have a bus standing by to ferry everyone down into town so that you can get into town, have a nice dinner, and it will also bring you back up to Mary White College. So it will be leaving from Marala at the end of the lecture if you want to have a lift down into town. But at that point, we would like to move on in the ceremonies and welcome Elizabeth Minchin to actually give the official welcoming for the Trendall lecture for tonight. Elizabeth.
The Australian Academy of the Humanities, the national body for the humanities in Australia, welcomes you all to the 21st lecture. The 21st Trendall lecture, the first of a program of events that will mark the Academy's 50th anniversary in 2019. The Trendall lecture was made possible through a bequest made by Professor A.D. Trendall, ACCMG, and a Foundation Fellow of the Academy. Born in 1909, Dale Trendall, a New Zealander, held academic posts at Sydney University, at the ANU and at La Trobe. He was the world authority on Southern Italian vase painting. On his death in 1995, he left a legacy to the Academy for an annual lecture on a classical subject. This week, the Academy will be posting past Trendall lectures on Twitter. And you can find the details of this lecture tonight and other anniversary lectures on the Academy's website. For the first time, the Trendall lecture will be presented jointly. Associate Professors Lee Beness and Tom Hillard are two highly respected and warmly regarded scholars who some time ago established a significant partnership here at UNE. Lee and Tom are now members of the Department of Ancient History at Macquarie University and Macquarie's Ancient Cultures Research Centre. Their research interests include Roman Republican history and landscape and harbour archaeology. Their current joint project is the Macquarie Dictionary of Roman Biography. On behalf of the Academy, I am delighted to invite Lee Beness and Tom Hillard to present the 21st Trendall lecture at the crossroads and in the crosshairs, Class, Ideology and Personality-Driven Politics at Rome in the 2nd century BC. Lee and Tom, thank you.
I don't think we've changed at all. Now, I'll just have to get this off. So, put my glasses on will help as well. Okay. Well, it's very special to be back in Armidale, and particularly in this lecture theatre where I heard my first lecture in English in 1980, given by Alison Hoddinott, if I'm not mistaken. I was then a nervous and shy 18-year-old Glen Ernest girl, But I vividly remember the excitement of cramped tutorials in the offices of the Moons, Elaine and Ken, and the risque lectures given by Jim Sate and Ian Grenfell. While I didn't go on to postgraduate work in English, it taught me a great deal about life and writing. And one's life, of course, is in good part shaped by one's teachers. And these teachers I'd like to acknowledge tonight. Roger Pitcher, Peter Toohey, Mina Markle, Greg Stanton. Where are you, Greg? Greg Stanton, Bruce Marshall. Bruce, are you here? Tomorrow. And Carmen Johansson. So you taught me a great deal. Armidale, of course, is also a special place because this was where I met Tom. Of course. Mentor. I said to Tom I must have choked up. Academic collaborator and friend. Okay, Tom. You may.
I might just take the roving mic because I move around so much. I hope you don't get trouble. You've all had your Dramamine.
Got it.
I too would like to pay my respects to the elders of the Anawan people and the Gumbaringa and the other tribes associated with this region. And I'd also like to apologise for the way I'm dressed, but it won't last after tonight, I can assure you. And I'd also like to thank the city, of which I have magical memories, including, it just strikes me now, performing in Jean-Paul Sartre's Huis Clos on this stage under the direction of a young drama student who went on to become the designer for Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. It was greater in the design than in the acting, I can tell you. And the city has been, and I want to take the opportunity to say that this. We'll all get choked up. This university rescued my career when it faltered. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, Bruce Marshall. I was also, I get too choked up if I also say.
Don't say it.
You know it. And so, without getting choked up also, I'd like to beg your indulgence for just a minute and mention the passing last night of a school teacher, just a school teacher. Those of us in this room who have the privilege of teaching at universities owe so much to that community that passes on year after year, particularly in New South Wales, a wave of enthusiasts. And one of the foremost, as our colleagues in Sydney will know, was Philippa Metcalf, who died last night. It's all right. It's going to get far more violent from here. It's a great privilege. It's daunting to give a Trendall lecture, to be asked to deliver one of these. As Elizabeth said, one of the founding members of the Academy, a great Australasian classicist, one of the world's most foremost classical art historians of the last century, Trendall, and amongst other things, a cryptographer. It's also daunting because Trendall was noted as a great communicator, so if we want to honour him as we should, that's another daunting task. The Trendall lectures often celebrate subjects that were particularly of interest to Trendall, and his particular fondness was, as Elizabeth has already said, for South Italian pottery. It was rather, we did have an option, and some people here rather hoped that we might talk about that. One of the legacies of Trendall was that he encouraged a young Alexander Cambidoglu to apply for the chair of archaeology at Sydney University. And out of the window of that, you'll see an important site, Taroney. But those of you who want to hear about Taroney will have to come to our paper at 9:30 tomorrow, which is and the blank slide is fine, don't worry about it. We want to talk about Rome and why Rome is important, because we're talking to members of the wider public here and not just the converted, it asks. Why does Rome matter? More specifically, why the Roman Republic? The Roman Republic matters to us as much as it matters to Machiavelli and Montesquieu and Rousseau and the thinkers and the constitutionalists who dreamt up new republics in the modern world in the 18th century. When looking around for the best models for the American Republic, Noah Webster in 1787 looked to the best constitutions that Europe had produced, the British and the Roman. So that's why we're interested in the Roman Republic, and it behoves us to think about it because it's important to us, because it was so important to them. And what really interests us is why such an inspirational system of government failed. Why did it fail? So how can we talk about Rome in a Trendall lecture? We take comfort in the thought that, did you know that Trendall lectured on Roman poetry? And did you know that the commendatore of the Gregory the Great order was a passionate Italophile. He spoke Italian fluently. He was a pillar of the Dante Alighieri Society, and he was, for a time, the librarian of a place which is a second home to us, the British School in Rome. So we don't feel that he will mind. From 1950 until the 1990s, Trendall each year returned to Rome annually, so that he had the nickname over there of the Rondine d'Inverno, or the swallow of winter, the winter swallow. Okay, to Rome then. And we want to introduce you to our project, which is the Macquarie Dictionary of Roman Social and Political Biography project. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, to the wonderful world of prosopography. This is a name which we don't want any of you, and Lewis here will be getting ready to go. The dictionary is really a dictionary of prosopography rather than biography, and what prosopography seeks to do is populate the stage with as many of the players as is possible. And prosopography, for those of you who are not classicists, comes from the word prosopon, of course. Prosopon is Greek for face. Prosopeia is a mask. You'll be familiar with them from the Greek stage, but in the Latin it's the imago. This is an essential element of Roman elite society, the imago. The imagones, the masks of the ancestors. You'd be forgiven for looking at some of the early attempts, that these are death masks. Lewis is getting ready to come in here quickly. They are not, and you'll know how powerful these are. Those of you from Melbourne who have gazed into the face of Ned Kelly will know how powerful these images are. But they are living masks. Here are some experimental masks done by students at Cornell University, and they talked about the almost visceral feeling they had as they worked up the masks. One of them had to replace a mask and watch it burn down and watch down the face of a friend disappear. These are really powerful images from the ancient world. So this is prosopography. The imagones, the busts of the ancestors, as I said, a fundamental feature of Roman elite society. They adorned the quasi-public vestibules of the great houses, and they farewelled any given politician as he went out into public life in the morning, and they welcomed him back. Their implicit and insistent injunctions to achieve were relentless. And we'll return to those in a moment, these masks. But we'll also look at the concept of imitatio patris, the imitation of the father. A Roman son, we're told, was supposed to step into the traces of his father, to be the living image of his father, both in physically and in action. So you might think that these impose a rather conservative or a certain conservatism, which they did. The project dates, I'm afraid to say, back to the 1990s, and we have been too long drawn from it by administration and heavy first-year teaching, which we love, and by maritime archaeology in Greece, which is has been kind of fun, actually. But this has invited us back into the world of prosopography. This was, in fact, the brainchild of Dr. Colleen McCulloch Robinson, who conceived the need for something like this as she researched her 7 novels on Republican Roman politics. And what she wanted from us was an English version of all of the wonderful biographical entries in the Pauli Wissewa Real Encyclopedia de Klassischer Wissenschaft. And we had to explain to her that what was needed, of course, was more an updating. And so she actually put some money behind Lee having some research time very early in the piece under the direction of Professors Edwin Judge and Alana Nobbs, who's with us tonight in the 1990s. Now we're about to, now I am retired, and as soon as I get out of this suit, I'm getting back into it. I can tell you. The pilot volume here that we have will of course start with an acknowledgement of the Laras Press. We will begin with a dedication to Friedrich Munzer, and I just pause momentarily to acknowledge Therese Ridley for her translation of the man's monumental magnum opus. She's with us tonight, and it will also be dedicated to Thomas Robert Broughton of the Magistrates of the Roman Republic, of course. And of course there will be a dedication to the singular and indefatigable Colleen McCulloch, who, blessed be her memory. But it will contain about 1,500 entries of every known Roman citizen, whether an office holder or not, who is known in the evidence, plus every known member of that Roman citizen's household. We will cover in that, this is to make you think that we've actually gone a long way down the track, more than we have, but we will cover senators, even those for whom little is known, children. We will cover those who made a great mark on Roman history, like Anicius Gallus. We will cover, Bronwyn would like to, women, and for Lewis too. And Lewis will notice that Tertia has gone in brackets just before her name. Citizens who held no public office, and slaves, as every known slave by name, and negotiatores, traders and the like, Acutius. Here is the first man who ever arrived, I say to our Egyptological friends, here is the first Roman who arrived at Aswan, which he did on August the 26th, 116 BC, very kindly leaving this datum on a temple wall in Philae, where it was found when the stone was overturned during the rescue of the island because of the Aswan dam. There's been a tendency to write prosopography off as wanting, as passé, as enacted by automatons, as superficial and amoral even. And we had intended a theme of tonight's presentation to be a defence and a celebration of prosopography. No time for the former defence, that would take up another hour as well, so that's all gone. But one thing that's particular will allow what we're doing, hopefully, to be a celebration of prosopography and what it can offer. One particularly annoying critique of prosopography, renewed only last year, actually, was that it is a product of the modern age of disillusionment, and that it carries with it a whiff of amoralism, that it serves up a frozen waste vision of Roman politics, and that prosopographers only see the Machtfrage and not the Rechtsfrage. They only see the power plays and not the struggle over ideas and laws and justice and political principles. Well, we'll leave it for you after this to see whether you think our approach is that vapid. But we'll leave that for you. You can see that. And by the way, Machtfrage and Rechtsfrage, it's not like chewing gum and whistling at the same time. Even male scholars should be able to multitask that much to cope with it. The prosopographical approach can accommodate a complex web of historical explanation. So the period that we're interested in is the period from 168 to 111. And 168 at the one of the pivotal battles of Pydna, Rome put an end to Macedonian power in the Mediterranean and became a dominant power in the Mediterranean. At the other end of that spectrum, in 111, Rome is on the eve of a war that will consolidate its holdings in North Africa. In betwixt times, of course, in this period, we have two cities, Carthage and Corinth. Two of the leading cities of the Mediterranean are by Rome. First Carthage, and then Corinth will be destroyed, with Rome doing everything but sowing salt into the fields, as Emeritus Professor Ridley has made known to us. And then, of course, in 133, Rome's first civil violence, another pivotal moment in Roman history where murder and mayhem hit the Roman streets. Rome's apparent transformation of Mediterranean geopolitics within the first generation of the 2nd century seemed to Greek observers nothing short of remarkable. In the first 6 months of 167, Rome celebrated 3 triumphs over 3 major victory parades in Rome over Balkan kingdoms, and the last of those was the most spectacular, which was the triumph of Lucius Aemilius Paulus over King Perseus of Macedon. And of course it took 3 days, because 1 day did not suffice for the parade of booty and other celebratory items through the streets of Rome. It was from that time that the tribute from the provinces and from other conquered territories would suffice for Roman public needs, and Roman citizens were not taxed. Roman citizens paid no tax from this time on. Would it last? We're told that Lucius Aemilius Paulus's son, Scipio Aemilianus, watching Carthage go up in flames by his order and was systematically destroyed, shed tears and contemplated the seeming inevitability of states. But it wasn't wholly inevitable. Scipio would not have subscribed to any concept of preordained future that negated human agency, but we'll come back to that in a moment. The Romans, after Pydna, might well have marvelled at their own longevity. It's been announced, and while Professor Hitchcock is still here with us, I will say that there has been in the 1970s an observation by a biblical scholar called George Mendenhall that few, as he put it, socio-political organisations of the ancient world survived for more than 250 or 300 years, all past its 10th generation. Now, Rome had already, from the beginning of the Republic, survived for 340 years, and they were up to their 9th, if we take the Claudia Pulchri as a yardstick, they were up to their 9th or perhaps 10th generation. Was it all going to last? Rome's success required explanation, and one of those explanations was the relative stability of Roman government. Polybius argued that Rome's principal strength at that moment, was its mixed constitution with its celebrated checks and balances, its politeia. Now, as so many of the people here know, Rome had no constitution, which is a fact underlying so much of the way its political process developed. It rested on law and custom, with perhaps custom prevailing. But Polybius knew that Rome had evolved, and he knew that it would keep on evolving. Polybius says existing things are subject to decay and change. That's a truth which hardly needs proof, says Polybius. That generation that we're looking at in this period knew that they had decisions to make if Rome was to survive. They knew that. It was in their hands. We tend to see the Romans as affronted by the very concept of change, and not without reason, because new things, novi, were regarded as automatically seditious. They were seditio. And yet, the Romans were familiar with and accustomed to the idea of transformation and reform. Rome may not have had a constitution, but it would be a mistake to think that the Romans were not capable of constitutionalist thought. They thought that the strength of Rome's system of government was that it had not been preserved in aspect. They did not have a single founding father. They did not have a Minos. They did not have a Lycurgus. They did not have a Solon, and they were bloody proud of that. It was something that evolved over many centuries, they thought, and it was hardened by experience and tested by experience. In times of peace, custom must prevail. In times of war, expediency. And Rome was every year at war. So they knew that there was change on the way. The Roman elite of the 2nd century were living within a context of profound transformation, cultural, social and demographic and intellectual. And it was this, in the scheme of things, a rapidly evolving situation. The choice was not a stark one between tradition and change. Tradition provided some sort of guidance, but change was the reality. They moved in a milieu requiring constant negotiation, and this in turn required multiple personal decisions, collective and intellectual and individual. And in this context, prosopography has much to offer. So let's briefly just have a look at that period. In that period of Pydna, after the Battle of Pydna, let's go back one moment to Pydna. There was a conga line of embassies from states all around the Mediterranean coming to congratulate and to genuflect, literally genuflect. The scene that springs to mind is the final scene of Mario Puzo's Godfather in the study of Michael Corleone. And kings threw themselves on the floor of the Senate House and called the senators their saviours. A 3-man Roman embassy would tell 2 warring Hellenistic kingdoms of Syria and Egypt to stop it on the battlefield. And they did. A 3-man embassy virtually on the battlefield will tell them. The Ptolemaic kings then went, the Ptolemies of Egypt called the Roman Senate and people more important to them, more worthy to them than their own parents and their gods. This is what's happening now. And one of those Ptolemies, Ptolemy VI, left in his will, inscribed on stone, that if anything should happen to him, he left his kingdom to Egypt, left his kingdom to Rome. In Asia Minor, in the Pergamum kingdom, a Pergamum king left his kingdom to Rome in 133 BC, and Rome took it when he died. So we have, after Pydna, let's go on. Oh yes, roads. Let's talk about the roads. The roads began to spread like tentacles of empire, and what I'm showing you here now is a milestone from the Via Domitia across southern Gaul. This milestone is the oldest surviving Roman monument in France today. It's in the museum at Narbonne, and I'll show you here a milestone from the Via Egnatia, marking in bilingual terms, in Greek and in Latin, that it is 260 miles from the place where it was found to Dyrrachium. These roads were these roads, of course, as monuments of empire, stunned those who watched these roads progress with undeviating insistence across the landscape. And Domitius Hannibarbus, who built the Via Domitia up here across to Narbo, advertised Roman presence by riding an elephant along the road after it was built. Rome's society was fundamentally changing in this period. In 168 BC, we have Rome's first bakery. More of that later on, but I mean, this just shows you how very many monumental things were happening. Roman, of course, people don't live by bread alone. The Lucius Aemilius Pallas asked the Athenians to send him their most illustrious philosopher and teacher to teach his sons, and they chose Metrodorus. And Aemilius Pallas gave over to his sons the library of the Macedonian kings. This was in 167. In 146, Hermodorus of Salamis built a portico for Metellus Macedonicus from Macedonian booty, which was a Hellenized precinct adorned with Greek art, and within that precinct, Rome's first marble temple. The first marble temple goes up. He also, sometime between 138 and 133, built a temple of Mars for Brutus Callaicus, also adorned with Greek art, and possibly the Ludovisi Mars, which you will now see in the Piazza al Temps. Badian says that Hermodorus changed the face of Rome within the space of a generation. Well, others helped, actually, but you get the picture. There was a pushback. In 155, and this pushback comes with it's a struggle for minds and hearts and loyalties. In 155, a three-man all-star philosophical embassy arrives in Rome and wows the crowd while they're waiting for their ambassadorial business to be done by giving exhibition lectures in the Forum. Really wows the new generation until Cato comes to the Senate and says, let's get their business done as quickly as possible and get these Greeks out of Rome so that the Romans will go back to what they need to go back to. In 154, the next year, two Epicurean missionaries, if James Uden is here, can correct me on whether they've got the date right, two Epicurean missionaries are expelled from Rome. In the same year, the censors decide to build Rome's first permanent theatre. It doesn't get off the ground because the consul, Scipio Nausicaa, says that this will be deadly to Roman morale. It must go. It's altogether too Greek. None of this for Rome. From 161 down to 131, we have a succession of sumptuary laws which attempt to control elite consumption and ostentatious display, trying to pull Rome back on track. The Lex Fania is brought into play, we're told, because young boys were losing their virtues at banquets and plebeians were turning up to the assembly under the weather. The Lex Licinia then decides to control the tables of the elite. Only a bird of one type is allowed to be served at each banquet. No bird and fattening is allowed. Salzaders are right out. This is the these are the leges sumptuaria. We're told after Pydna that Polybius thought that the political scene would become far more competitive as Rome reached this position of strength. He was not mistaken. In 148, Scipio Aemilianus won the consulship for 147, although the laws forbade it because he was underage. The laws were changed for Scipio because he was a hero. He won a second consulship in 134, again against the laws which were annulled for 1 year for Scipio Aemilianus. Let's go back to another issue. The people are becoming restless. The citizenry are becoming restless, in part because of the uneven distribution of wealth in Rome from its great successes. The triumph of Aemilius Paulus over Macedon, the victory parade, almost did not go ahead because his own troops, exercising their rights as citizens, decided that he was a stingy bastard and he ought not to have a triumph. And they were about to pull this off. On that occasion, the Principes, the leading men of the Roman Senate, simply went up onto the Capitol, told a voting electorate that they were getting it wrong and to stop and to vote again. And they did. They wouldn't get away with it so easily later on. In 151, we have draft evasion, one of the first occasions of major draft evasion in Rome, with young boys, according to an eyewitness, alleging problems that it was indecent to allege, unseemly to inspect, and impossible to prove. But they were attempting to get out of the military draft. In 145 BC, a tribune by the name of Curiatus, arguing that the priests ought to be elected by the people, became the first tribune to turn his back on the Roman Senate and face the people directly. The movement had gone on. In 139, we have the introduction of legislation bringing in secret ballot for elections. This is monumental. Lee will just talk about this in just a moment. In 138, more desertions and famine hit Rome. Deserters from the Roman army are scourged in the Roman Forum and sold into slavery for 1 sestertius apiece. We're told that the consul of that year, Scipio Nausicaa, tells an angry mob, a hungry, angry mob, be quiet. I know what is best for the Roman Republic, not you. Get a bridging loan, or something like that. The urban populace, and I don't really have time to go into that, but there's old Curiatus bringing in that law. Urban the urban population of Rome was changing in that 167 censorship. The censors discussed what to do with the number of ex-slaves who were joining Rome's. Ex-slaves immediately became citizens of Rome, and they voted. Where to put their vote became a major issue. Rome's first bakery in 168. Why is it such a big deal? Why do we have a bakery? Because an increasingly large and impersonal metropolis needs to buy bread and not to cook it within clan groups. We have this movement going on. In 146, as we know, Rome discussing the fate of these two major cities in the Mediterranean will discuss it in terms of Rome's future, and Cato will argue that Carthage must be obliterated. Scipio Nausicaa, again, will argue that Rome needs a strong enemy to keep Rome's moral fibre intact. We know what will happen. Rome will decide to go it alone and go for the supremacy and work it out later. 5 problems seem to have dominated Roman thinking at the time, or seems to be most important to me. The decline of citizenship manpower, so important for the army, the drift of small peasantry from the land, and the transformation of Italy's landscape. One important result of that, of course, was that Rome was now increasingly dependent upon importing staples. The growth of an urban population and the growth of the latifundia, large estates run on slave labour, and stemming from that, a homeland security problem. There's an exponential growth in slavery. In 176, 80,000 Sardinians are dropped on the slave market, dropping the bottom out of the market. There's a Roman proverb, as cheap as Sardinians. It's best and less sort of stuff. In 167, 70 towns in Epirus, to satisfy the troops of Aemilius Paulus, and they weren't satisfied, were sacked in a single day, realising 150,000 slaves. These are people passing into slavery for the first time, and they're angry. This is the age of the Great Slave Revolts. In 198, the town of Setia, just south of Rome, and overlooking the Appian Way, and well defended, was taken by its slaves. It was put down by a militia of 2,000. The slaves moved on Praeneste and were put down in that year. Etruria, almost the whole of Etruria, was a battlefield, according to Livy, when the slaves revolted there, and a legion had to be raised against them. 7,000 slaves were eventually crucified at the end of that. In 185, in Apulia, shepherds took the public highways, and a praetor needed Tarentum as his province to actually put down the slaves. And then in the 130s, comes the humdinger. It's all coming together as a perfect storm in the 130s. A slave revolt goes up, slave by the name Eunice breaking his chains there. In Enna is the heart of Sicily, and a reminder that Rome was about to lose one of its major grain-producing provinces. Now, Enna goes up, several other towns are taken, they're joined by other groups. From Agrigentum, Taormina will all go up in flames as the slaves take this, and they will spread. In Minturnae, 450 slaves revolt and have to be put down. In Sinuessa, how many slaves in Sinuessa? 7,000, I think. 4,000 in Sinuessa go down, and in Athens, in the silver mines, 1,000 slaves revolt. And, of course, on Delos, the island, which is now a slave trading island, there's a revolt. Not just there in Asia Minor, the slaves revolt, also in the 130s. And in Rome, 150 slaves have to be crucified because of a revolt there. Things are quite serious for the Roman Republic at this time. And that moves us on into 133 BC and Rome's first civil violence. And Lee's looking at me with wide eyes, meaning like, shut up. I'll very, very briefly, because I want Lee to get on to important things, so I'll just skip most of what I wanted to say about this, except that what is Rome going to do about its future? Tiberius Gracchus has a plan, and it was retrogressive. He saw Rome's future in its past, and he would turn the clock back. According to this plan, Gracchus would help drain Rome of surface population. He would repopulate the Italian countryside with smallholders, and these are men who would serve in the Roman citizen militia. This was popular, and the people were crying out for it. There was a graffiti campaign saying, "Give us land." A problem. Where's the land coming from? He would redistribute public land, agor publicus, and he would put an upper limit on the acreage that could be held by squatters and appropriate the excess. The problem was that the squattocracy who owned the land and worked it with large slave armies did not want to let it go. Opposition was assured. Various groups, including the Scipionic Circle, had thought about this but let it go because it was simply too divisive. Land was sacred. In a modern republic, which is based on Rome itself, what are the inalienable rights that we all hold dear? Life, liberty, and the quaintly aspirational pursuit of happiness. That's strange that they came up with that. John Locke earlier had said that society exists for the defence of property, which is life, liberty, and a state. So the pursuit of happiness is a nice little twist. But the Romans would have gone for the property. The state exists for the protection of property. I won't go into that. So the issue was very obviously divisive, and Tiberius Gracchus's style was polemical. We have a fragment of his speeches, or one of his speeches to the people, saying, when the Roman generals ask their troops to fight and die for their temples and for their land, it is a lie. Not one of them possesses a plot of land to call his own. The wild beasts that roam Italy have caves and dens, but not the people who fight and die for others. This is polemical class war. His enemies would say it was the politics of envy, but it is undoubtedly polemical in a class sense. Unfortunately for the opponents of Gracchus, he was one of Rome's best speakers, and he wasn't going to let it run. Here's the rub, and let me say, and this is where personalities come into it. Gracchus was a man, and I don't have time now to go into details about Gracchus, except to say he was a man in a hurry who did have his own psychological demons, who had a legacy to carry, and he was locked in competition with his cousin. His cousin probably didn't know he was locked in competition with him at the time, but his cousin was the man who just destroyed Carthage, Publius Scipio Aemilianus. And Scipio Aemilianus had his own demons. We know he was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with achievement. He had a father whom he had to imitate, who'd been a consul twice and who'd held 2 triumphs. He'd had a grandfather who was Scipio Africanus, the man who'd conquered Hannibal. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus had a very similar legacy. His father had also been a consul twice and a censor and had won 2 triumphs. And he was the man who brought the 80,000 Sardinian slaves to Rome. More than that, they shared their grandfather through the mother. Publius Scipio Africanus, they were both the grandsons of Scipio Aemilianus. Who would be the one to achieve the best? The person who kept the flame burning was the daughter of Africanus, the mother of the Gracchi, who upbraided her sons with, when shall I be known as the mother of the Gracchi and not the mother-in-law of Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus. Just to prosperographically enliven the whole event, Tiberius Gracchus's father-in-law, Appius Claudius Pulcher, who was the leading man in the Senate, was one of Scipio Aemilianus's leading opponents. Anyway, Gracchus will come forward with his law, and he will brook no opposition, although everything is thrown at him, including he will, if necessary, depose a colleague, which will alienate conventional Roman thought, and the law will go through. Let me, just before I do talk about the frightening and horrendous violence which is now about to erupt, say that the people were angry. Yes, they were angry. But there was no violence from below. For those of you who have been watching the news from Paris and the goings-on of the Gilets Jaunes, the yellow bags, there was no violence from below. There was, however, this. Just a reminder of how confronting graffiti can be when it goes up on public monuments. And it went up on public monuments all through 133, saying, Gracchus, give us land. Gracchus presses ahead, the law goes ahead for the division of land. Just to make sure it goes ahead properly, it will go ahead with a commission of 3, himself, his younger brother, and his father-in-law, Appius Claudius Pulcher, will divide up the land. Just to make sure that his land law is not thwarted after his own passage out of office, Gracchus will stand for office a second time. Continuity in office is one of the major affronts to Roman custom. On the day of the election, when this will happen, the Senate meets in crisis session. Appius Claudius Pulcher, his father-in-law, who was the leading man in the Senate, is nowhere to be seen. We don't know what happened to him. But just to talk about the way personalities now intervene, the consul who is in the chair is Publius Mucius Scaevola, who has his own very strong personality, his own ideology, and his ideology is the law. He is one of the founders of Roman civil law, and nothing illegal will pass under his watch. He will not do anything illegal. The opposition now find a leader in Publius Cornelius Scipio Nausicaa, who's another cousin of Gracchus and another grandson of Scipio Africanus, who happens to be one of the largest, if you want the class warfare, he happens to be one of the leading landowners in the state. He also, if you want personality-driven politics or ideology, he's the son of the Gracchus who stopped the first stone theatre being built. He is also Rome's chief priest with a tremendous amount of religious authority that goes with that. And he's someone who hates the people. He's the man who in 138 BC said to the crowd that was hungry, "Shut up, I know what is best for the state, not you." He's also a man who hated the underprivileged and was not liked by them. Here in Armidale, we have to remember that Scipio Aemilianus was a man who, in canvassing for office, he was canvassing for the aedileship, and he was glad-handing, and he failed rural electioneering 101. He grasped the hand of a peasant and, in his urbanity, recoiled in horror at the calloused hand and said, "Do people walk on their hands where you come from?" This was overheard and he lost the election. Scipio Nausicaa doesn't like the people. He rises and says, he rises in the Senate and says, "Since the consul, Mucius Scaevola, by sticking to the letter of the law, will see to it that all of our laws and Rome's empire will perish, I call upon all of those who care for the safety of the state to follow me." And they just go up onto the Capitol Hill and club Tiberius Gracchus and 300 other people to death at the same time, and Rome loses whatever's left of its innocence. Scipio Nausicaa has played with a new principle which should exercise us all right now. Nort kennt kein Gebot. Or if you want that, this is the German Beethoven Holwig was the Vice-Chancellor in Germany during the First World War. If you want that in Latin. Necessity knows no law. Think about it. Scipio Nausicaa has implanted that on the Roman political scene now. Necessity knows no law. Lee and I would like to just draw your attention to Giorgio Agamben, he's an Italian philosopher, who's written a book called State of Exception. All of us as citizens in the global community of today ought to think about what we think about that principle of necessity knows no law. Scipio Nausicaa has taken Rome into uncharted territory. But I wouldn't, believe it or not, I'd like Lee to say something.
Okay, in the second part of the lecture, which I promise will be shorter, we'd like to look at one more year that is scarcely retrievable without a prosopographical approach. And in terms of its historical significance, it might fit up there with 133. As he hurtles at breakneck speed through Rome's history, Velleius Paterculus pauses to mark a signal event. A short time after Scipio's return to Rome in the consulship of Manius Aquilius and Gaius Sempronius 160 years ago, this is 129 BC, this man who had held 2 consulships, had celebrated 2 triumphs, had twice destroyed cities, which had brought terror to his country, was found in the morning dead in his bed, with marks as though of strangulation on his throat. Great man though he was, no inquest was held concerning the manner of his death, and with covered head was borne to the grave the body of him whose services had enabled Rome to lift her head above the whole world. So the year was important for a number of other reasons. As it is, the torrid events are all but lost to us. We lack a detailed account of any length of what happened in that year. Livy wrote one. It would have been a substantial part of his book 54, but book 54 hasn't survived. We have in its place 20 lines of a later epitome. For Plutarch, this year would have provided the climax of his life as Scipio Aemilianus, but it is lost. Catherine would like us, no doubt, to mention an even later writer, Appian, who provides a short account built into his prelude to the Civil Wars, about 48 lines. The account that we have collated is pieced together from an array of patchy source material, and perhaps every third item is contentious. We're glad to defend each item, but we'll spare you the long footnotes. You can quiz us later. What we hope it will demonstrate is the value of prosopographical research and the necessity of utilising multiple approaches. It also provides a snapshot of the parlous state of the Roman Republic. 129 BC opened with a high degree of public trepidation. The omens were baleful. And here again we enter the realm of religio. Towards the end of 130, a statue of Apollo wept for 3 or 4 days, presaging civil discord. On the advice of the soothsayers, the people voted the statue be hewn into pieces and thrown into the sea. Towards the beginning of 129, a rain of stones killed a number of people and struck temples, eliciting a serious response. 9 days of ritual expiation was decreed. Retrospectively, both omens were interpreted as having forecast the dreadful events that were to unfold that year, and the omens would continue. Now, 130 BC had been marked by the death of 2 of the Senate's leading members, the brothers-in-law Publius Licinius Crassus Mucianus, the Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest, and Appius Claudius Pulcher, the Princeps Senatus, who we've met with Tom. They had, we're told, formed a powerful bloc in the Senate opposed to Scipio Aemilianus. And after their deaths, their places as thorns in the side of Scipio were filled by none other than Mucianus' brother, our old legal friend Mucius Scaevola, and by Quintus Paculius Metellus Macedonicus, one of the censors of 131-130, and we'll meet him again. The political year might be said to have begun on December the 10th of the preceding year, when the College of 10 Tribunes entered office. Our ignorance is underlined by the fact that only one tribune can be identified, but that tribune is a showstopper, Gaius Papirius Carbo. The dating, by the way, is our own, and we're happy to argue the point with anyone later. Carbo is directly linked to the contentious developments which we've just dealt with, or Tom's dealt with, land redistributions. Gracchus's death did not abrogate the land law, and the work of a commission of 3, a triumviral commission, went on apace. And after Gracchus's assassination, his place had been taken by the Pontifex Maximus Crassus Mucianus, his brother's father-in-law, and a legal counsel on the initial drawing up of the legislation. After the deaths in 130 of Crassus and Appius Claudius, the places on the Land Commission were first filled by a certain Marcus Fulvius Flaccus, and then by Carbo. Importantly, these men were young. The elder councillors were gone, and the eldest of the trio that now took up the Gracchus cudgels was in his mid-30s. Age had not sapped their energies, nor wearying experience their zeal. So the surveying of land and the cadastral divisions, and it must be assumed the confiscations and reassignments of land, moved on at quite a remarkable pace. And for this we must turn to three different types of evidence. Two of them are primary. Boundary stones, which have survived, all too few, often recording the names of the land commissioners, the vestiges of Roman centuriation from this period, and the list of Gracchus colonies preserved in a late antique 4th century Liber Coloniarum, a book of colonies. We're showing you here the sites where boundary stones, Kipi Gracchani, marking out the land divisions, have been found. And we've visited all these locations, and they're all to be found in Italy's plum agricultural regions. And here are some of them here. In Puglia, for instance, we find signs of centuriation, the square grid systems by which arable land was actually divided up by the Gracchus commissioners for allocation to settlers. And this is how they survive today, highlighted by aerial photography. And you can see the squares in the landscape. What the camera's actually picking up is different rates of crop growth over the ditches and roads which divided the centuries. Large squares of 200 yuga, or about 50 hectares. These reshaped ecosystems have been called some of the most outstanding monuments generated in Roman antiquity. You get the picture, I'm sure. Now, two of these boundary stones were of particular interest to us, and they were found in the vicinity of an Italian town called Colenza Valvatore. Now, it wasn't easy to find a parking spot in this town, so we asked one of the local carabinieri, who happened to be there, why are you here? He said to us. We're interested in Cipi Gracchani, we said. I have one, he said. And it happened that the local carabinieri office actually doubled as the local archaeo club, and he was very proud of it, so we went in there and took lots of photographs. It has a special feature which you can possibly spot. There are only two triumvirs, Marcus Fulvius Flaccus along the top there, and Gaius Gracchus. You see the C for Gaius Sempronius Gracchus. It's not a mistake. A line is left blank, and there is another stone which actually replicates this. Obviously, Appius Claudius and Mucianus are both dead. Fulvius Flaccus has filled one of these spots, but Carbo has not yet been elected to fill the third. Clearly, it seems to us the triumvirs were in a rush. A less than full board was not going to slow them down. And the commission, it appears, was working its way along some of the chief arterial roads, and in 129 BC they were working their way into Samnium in central Italy. Now, on the merits or otherwise of this program, the Roman community was, as we've seen, deeply divided. Given the nature of the surviving source tradition, it's the outrage of the property owners that is most audible, virtually speaking, and their peril is given much attention. When the land was resurveyed, some owners, we're told, were obliged to give up their fruit trees and farm buildings in exchange for naked ground. Others were transferred from cultivated to uncultivated lands or to swamps or pools. As the persons in possession of land neglected to hand in lists of their holdings, says Appian, a new proclamation was issued, we presume by the triumvirs, that informers should furnish testimony against them, and immediately a great number of embarrassing lawsuits sprang up, and they proved quite hard to deal with. The lands of the Italian allied communities were affected, and the allies, or the property-owning class amongst them, brought their complaints to Rome, and more on this in a minute. On their side, the triumvirs, the land commissioners, had the law and popular support in Rome, and they were formidable in personality and talent, especially the younger two. Cicero, from his particular political perspective, bemoaned the fact that Carbo's genius for speaking was not matched by his service to the state. If he'd stuck to the right path, none would have surpassed him in glory. Instead, Again, according to Cicero, he was factious, ready to undermine the state, and a rotter, seditiosus atque improbus. His public behaviour was marked by light-headed demagogy. But Cicero had to acknowledge he was eloquentissimus, indeed an orator of the first rank and the best advocate of his day. He was noted for his good voice and the vigour of his manner, but alongside the vehemence he had considerable charm and an engaging humour, we're told. And now Carbo was a tribune, with the power and the opportunity to sway minds and the capacity to promulgate legislation. And in public assemblies, we're told he frequently lamented the death of Tiberius Gracchus. But there was more to it than incendiary and provocative agitation. He had a program. He introduced a law that would allow a candidate to hold the tribunician office relatively and for as many times as the plebs so voted. There was, we're of the mind, nothing strictly illegal about the plebs voting for whomever it wanted in office. But as we've seen, it was electrifyingly contrary to custom. Carbo had in mind nothing short of legislating for a change in Rome's political process. Now, if Carbo had announced his bill on the reiteration of tribunician office as soon as he became a tribune, it will have come to the vote early in January 129 BC. Intense and occasionally ferocious debate ensued as the Roman community prepared to vote on how it should be governed. My friend Jorg Schietinger has argued that Carbo's intention was to hold the office repeatedly to use his tribunician veto against any attempts to undermine or eradicate the Gracchus reform program. More broadly, of course, it was aiming at vindicating posthumously Gracchus's final actions. And in terms of Roman political process, to potentially alter the balance of power, opening the way to government by tribunician plebiscite, something that would indeed be realised in the next 6 years. Carbo's performance was impressive. His speeches to the people were smooth-tongued, flattering and coaxing, and he won the favour of those assembled. His triumviral colleague, young Gaius Gracchus, whom Carbo as tribune might now call to the rostra, came out firing. And Gaius, Tiberius's younger brother, treated the crowd to some electrifying moments. He too is now proved was a gifted orator, even more so perhaps than his elder brother. He had for some time, and for very understandable reason, kept a low profile after his brother's murder, and the public too quickly assumed him intimidated. From the time of his first public appearances, however, his opponents and the political establishment were given cause to dread what would happen when he attained office. He had the people inspired and frantic with sympathetic delight and made other orators appear to be no better than children, says Plutarch. Gaius Gracchus was incandescent. For him, it was personal. Whereas Tiberius, by comparison, had been gentle and sedate, Gaius was highly strung and vehement, presenting a visual spectacle on the rostra. He was, in fact, awe-inspiring in his passion, yet his speech, we are told, was persuasive and ornate. It was, as I said, personal, but he was also prompted to a political program that would consume him. He himself played up the apparent delay in assuming a public role, avowing that he'd been goaded into action by an apparition of his brother. "I had a dream," we can imagine him thundering. In the dream, his brother had said, "Why do you hesitate, Gaius? There is no escape. One life is fated for us both, and one death as champions of the people." Gaius Gracchus's outlook then was ideological, and it was pessimistic. He was Tuesday's child. Probably born after his father's death, he had by now lost all of his 5 brothers and all 6 sisters, barring one, his eldest brother in the most extraordinary and contentious of circumstances. So anger prevailed. He wanted to see a change in the manner of Rome's governance, and he wanted to see the Senate stripped of its gubernatorial role. We have one fragment of the speech he made on the occasion of Carbo's reiteration bill. We owe it to an entry on the Latin interjection "m" in a late antique lexicon. It preserves two sentences verbatim. Pessimi Tiberium fratrem meam optimum interfecerent. Videte quam par pari sim. The very worst of men killed my most excellent brother Tiberius, who was the best. Look, you see how equally placed am I. These men considered themselves the optimi, the best. They were not, says Gaius. They were the worst. One is almost irresistibly drawn to think of the time when Robert Kennedy was publicly prompted to recall for the first time his brother John's assassination 4 and a bit years after the event. That too was electrifying. But whereas Bobby, in extraordinarily challenging circumstances and speaking impromptu, sought harmony and inclusivity, Gaius Gracchus, 4 years on, embraced hate. In the debate on Carbo's reiteration law, recollection of the past and the models provided would play a significant part. Carbo brought Scipio before the people and asked his opinion on the death of his cousin. Cicero deemed the question malicious, or at least subversive, seditiosus again. Scipio hedged, but only slightly. If Tiberius Gracchus had been aiming at monarchy, regnum, he seemed to have been justly slain. The whole assembly, we're told, erupted at this. Scipio then treated the meeting to another electrifying moment. His response: "How can I, who have so many times heard the battle shout of the enemy without feeling fear, be disturbed by the shouts of men like you, to whom Italy is only a stepmother?" According to another version, "Let the stepchildren of Italy keep quiet." And then, as the angry noise rose, he made clear what his figurative language meant. "You will not bring it about that I should fear those now free, whom I once led here chained." A breathtaking allegation. Scipio is claiming that the assemblage of Roman citizens was constituted principally of ex-slaves whose loyalty to the state was suspect. These rowdy scenes were powerful evidence of the war hero Scipio's forfeiture of popular appeal. And we're told that the demos, having once justly and deeply loved him, began to heckle him as he was speaking, a thing which had never happened before. The Senate was also bitterly divided. The opposition to Scipio, a substantial and powerful section of the Fathers, was now led by none other than our old legal friend Mucius Scaevola, and by the illustrious Metellus Macedonicus, consular, ex-censor, triumphator. We've met him before. Between Metellus and Scipio, intense rivalry had degenerated into outright and serious enmity. Metellus, who was obviously present at this public meeting, took up Scipio's cavalier statement about his audience being essentially freedmen and cried out, "Allow us then to be free." It was a nice bit of sledging. The suggestion was that Scipio's arrogance gravely diminished the maestas populi Romani, the majesty of the Roman people, and that he regarded himself, vis-a-vis the Roman people, as a dominus. It's possible that at this critical moment, religio played its sombre part again. 2 black snakes slithered into the cellar of Minerva's temple, portending, we are told, a slaughter of citizens. On the day of the voting, however, the tide was somehow turned and the proposal on the reiteration of the tribunate failed. Our sources report that Scipio delivered the weightiest of orations on the subject. It was gravissima. Gaius Laelius also performed with customary elegance, but he readily handed the palm to Scipio. Yea, gods, what weight was in his speech, what gravitas, what maestas. Majesty, note, was now with Scipio, and this was not a word that the Romans would throw around lightly. "You would not hesitate to say," said Laelius, "that Scipio was not one of the Roman people, but the leader, Dux Populi Romani." Scipio's authority carried the issue, though his opponents might point to the fact that voters voted publicly. They were being watched by the elite. More of this in a moment. At this point, we're told that the Italian allied states, the grand Italian property owners at least, brought their complaints about the land distribution to Rome and sought Scipio as their champion. He obliged and took the matter to the Senate. Appian says that although out of regard for the demos, Scipio did not openly find fault with the law of Gracchus, he elaborated on its difficulties and urged that these cases should not be decided by the triumvirs because they did not possess the confidence of the litigants. The cases, he said, should be assigned to other courts. The Senate decided that the Consul of the Year, Sempronius Tuditanus, should be appointed to give judgment in these cases. The senators, one would think, could not simply abrogate a law, but there were ways in which, according to ancestral custom, it could free the people from observance of a given piece of legislation. All the same, the Senate was challenging the rights of the sovereign people as the state's legislative organ. Better still for the forces of conservatism, Appian tells us, when Tuditanus took up the work, he saw the difficulties of it and marched against the Illyrians as a pretext for not acting as judge. Nobody brought cases for trial before the triumvirs, and they remained idle. From this, says Appian, hatred against Scipio arose among the people because they saw a man in whose favour they had opposed the powerful and incurred their enmity, electing him consul twice contrary to law, now taking the side of the Italian allies against themselves. It got worse. Religio again. 2 suns appeared in the sky. Do not scoff. This is a phenomenon that is well known to modern astronomers and meteorologists as parhelia, when 2 images of the sun are projected because of the refraction of sunlight by ice crystals. You might think these apparitions are more likely in northern climes, but they've been seen in Italy and in Rome. To the Romans, the appearance of 2 suns portended great wars and/or deadly revolutions. Perniciosae seditiones, pernicious sedition. And when the Latin Games were held, we don't know exactly when, the omen of the 2 suns was on everyone's lips. And Cicero reconstructs a conversation, the bones and the details of which he had heard reported directly from one of the attendees, Publius Rutilius Rufus. It was a virtual symposium held in Scipio's gardens during a rest day at the time of the Latin Games, and morphed into a fully fledged debate on the nature of the ideal state. And the day opened with a discussion of these 2 suns, a heaven-sent sign or a natural phenomenon prompting metaphorical contemplation. And Cicero puts cheerless words into the mouth of Laelius. It is not these celestial matters that should concern us, but why, in one state, we've almost reached the point where there are 2 senates, and why there are almost already 2 separate peoples. And the situation was dire. For as you see, Laelius says, the death of Tiberius Gracchus, and even before his death, the whole character of his tribunate divided one people into 2 parts. But the hopelessly intermediate state of the Senate was of as much concern, and the bifurcation at the top spelled trouble. Laelius observes that the slanderers and ill wishers of Scipio, under the leadership of Mucius Scaevola and Metellus Macedonicus, kept one part of the Senate in dissent. And though these most seditious of triumvirs are each day striving to cook up something new, Noe was, as Tom said, a metonym for revolution, they will not allow Scipio, who was the one man who could, to come to the aid of the state in this dangerous emergency. This, says Laelius, not the 2 suns, is what we must bend our minds towards. A united people and a united Senate is within our capability, and as a goal, it is essential. Clearly, the Land Commission was continuing its work vigorously. In the unsympathetic eyes of the conservative source tradition, stirring up seditiones. What was it that the unfriendly half of the Senate was preventing Scipio from doing, as the one man Laelius thought capable? Scipio thinks Scipio is seeking a third consulship so that he might take up the adjudication of the land disputes. Scipio is prevented from coming to the aid of the state, and interestingly, the word put into Laelius's mouth here is subvenire, to come to the aid of, which carries nuances of military relief. And vocabulary here provides an important clue. We think it is the constantly used word seditio and its cognates, often in the superlative, that is the key. The language is rhetorical, but not simply rhetorical. The actions of the land commissioners, the triumviri, were seditious, dangerous to the state. What is to be done in such a circumstance? Early in the dialogue, they discussed the ship of state in times of peril, and just as sailors in a storm will turn to one man, so our people in terms of military danger, realising that safety must prevail over caprice, will turn in ready supplication to one whom they called dictator, who is called and named. The one who in more ancient times was called Magister Populi, the master of the people. At the finale of the speech, Cicero has Scipio himself reflect upon a dream wherein his grandfather, the elder Africanus, appeared to him, predicting that if Scipio survived, we know he did not, he would be called. In an echo of the utopia which Laelius has said they must strive for in the here and now, the Senate, all good citizens, the Allies, the Latins, will look to you. You shall be the sole support of the state's security. And in brief, it will be your duty as dictator to restore order in the Commonwealth. Dictator rem publicum constituas. In effect, dictator re publicae constituende causa. Rome would not, in fact, see such a thing for almost 1.5 centuries. Has Cicero pulled some retrospectively knitted wool over our eyes? Scholars are divided. We believe that the conservative Rome, or the conservatives in Rome, were now meditating on dictatorship, and that a mental trigger had been pulled in 133. Events now move swiftly. Scipio had not finished with the land commission, and the people feared the worst. Scipio's enemies, according to Appian, proclaimed that he was determined to abolish the law of Gracchus utterly, and for that end was about to inaugurate armed strife and bloodshed. Those two black snakes were clearly remembered. When the Demos heard these accusations, Appian reports they were in a state of alarm, and all hell breaks loose. The cry goes up, "Kill the tyrant!" Who was being denounced now for tyrannical aspirations? Scipio's riposte, this time, "Those who feel hostile towards our country wish to make away with me first, for it is not possible for Rome to fall while Scipio stands, nor for Scipio to live when Rome has fallen." Who was responsible for this chant, "Kill the tyrant"? Plutarch seems to place the responsibility squarely with none other than Gaius Gracchus. Even his mother, some think, thought that this might have been going too far, but that's another lecture. At this juncture, Appian tells us Scipio, after placing near his couch at home one evening a tablet on which to write during the night the speech he intended to deliver before the people, was found dead in his bed without a wound. Rumours circulated. Some said that slaves testified under torture that unknown persons were introduced through the rear of his house by night and suffocated him, and that those who knew about it hesitated to tell because the people were angry with him and rejoiced at his death. The suspects, none other than Gaius Gracchus himself, Carbo and Fulvius, that is, the triumvirs. Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, lest the law of Gracchus should be abolished, aided and abetted by her daughter, Scipio's unloved and unloving wife, Sempronia, against whom we believe Scipio may have spread the foulest of rumours. If slaves were interrogated under torture, as Appian tells us, it was an informal and internal matter. Velleius is adamant there was no inquest. Given the gossip in circulation, that is remarkable. More startlingly, Appian adds, Scipio, in spite of his extraordinary service to the state, was not even honoured with a public funeral. So much does the anger of the present moment outweigh gratitude for the past. That is to say, Scipio Aemilianus, twice consul, censor, destroyer of Carthage and Numantia, did not receive a state funeral. If Scipio was denied this, the situation dictating that was grave indeed. All the same, the funeral rites were obviously celebrated in public, though Scipio was not accorded the honour of a funeral at public expense. Here was the opportunity to reflect upon the past and impart a vision for Rome's future. The all-important Laudatio Funebris, the funerary oration, was carefully crafted. Scipio, having no son, it was to be delivered by one of his nephews, Quintus Fabius, but it had been written by Laelius and remembered by sympathisers for its resonant sentiments. It is not possible to give sufficient thanks to the immortal gods for this above all, that he, endowed with that mind and with those talents, was born a citizen of this state, Terrarum Imperium. The seat of world dominion would be where he was. But the speech was directed towards only one sector of a divided community. Nor is it possible to feel sufficient distress and bitterness that he had perished in that very season when both you, citizens of Rome, and all who desire the safety of this state had most need of him alive. Here again was the formulaic language used in times of an emergency levy, an evocatio, echoing quite unmistakably the words of Scipio Nasica when he had incited fellow thinkers in 133 BC to lynch Tiberius Gracchus. The speech spoke to identity politics and was not inclusive. There was still a chance to satisfy the wider public's appetites. A public banquet at Scipionic expense was to follow. These events were customarily spectacular, and we hear on some occasions of 10,000 tables and 200,000 entertained. Again, let me underline how personalities played a pivotal role. Scipio's nephew, Quintus Aelius Tubero, was tasked with the laying out of the dining area. In his late 30s, he too was formidable, intellectual, by self-design, rough and unpolished. For him, Stoicism was no mere hobby. Inspired by his uncle's commitment to austerity, he decided here was an opportunity to read the populace a lesson in Stoic philosophy. And wanting to demonstrate that leadership was a matter of substance and not show, he laid out crude wooden benches covered by shabby goat skins and served up the food in common earthenware, a celebration of old Rome and Stoic restraint. The public found his asceticism verging on the stingy and insulting. The Scipionic circle had lost this round in the battle for hearts and minds, and when Tubero next stood for office, he was not elected. The Conservatives' backs were to the wall, but they might still be dangerous. Cicero offers a picture of them contemplating their pain in the days following Scipio's death in his De Amicitia on friendship. Laelius speaks of his dread at what will happen when Gaius Gracchus runs for office. What to do about Carbo, he asked. Because of the recent penalty paid by Tiberius Gracchus, we need, as we have, to bear him as best we can. Because of the recent penalty paid by Tiberius Gracchus, that is, the slaughter of 300 souls on the Capitol, we'll just have to bear him as best we can, i.e., it is too soon to terminate him. The people wouldn't wear it. It now seems to me, says Laelius, that the people are estranged from the Senate and the weightiest affairs of state determined by the caprice of the mob. Carbo saw his chance. The people, in his judgment, had not voted for the reiteration of the tribunate because they were afraid. He proposed a bill for the introduction of secret ballot in legislative assemblies, and it passed. Laws would now come into being without the elite having the wherewithal to identify members of the voting public. And this was a momentous change. The balance of power in the Roman Republic had taken a major turn. There's so much more to tell you about 129, but no time, and I'll briefly hand this over to Tom.
I had some really resonating things to say about where Rome went from there, but belatedly I know when to stop and let you all get some food and some dinner. So I'll close it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time is against us, of course. You will have the next 3 days posing endless questions to Tom and to me. But I hope you'll join me in thanking Tom for expertly setting the scene and to Lee for peopling it so vividly and so expertly as well.
Thank you. Thank you.